This talk was given by Roshi Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today is Saturday, October 12th. This is the first day of our 5-day 2024 Jataka sesshin. I couldn't believe it when Roshi announced at the opening words that this is our 15th year. I can't believe that. It's really quite a pleasure to be growing old with all of you. So I'd like to look at today a Jataka we've looked at before, and I'd like to look at it a little differently than we have before, perhaps. So we're going to look at the Banyan Deer, which is, I think, a really central and really important Jataka with a great deal of relevance for our time. There was an earlier version of this Jataka and its talk, which appeared in an earlier book of mine before Buddha was Buddha. But here I've really revised it, and I'd like to use a different version of the story, which is a standalone version that takes the perspective of the animal beings in it, not the Buddha, but they themselves tell the story. So let's begin with the Jatakas. The Jatakas, as you know, are past life stories of the Buddha, and when combined with the various traditional versions of the legendary life of the Buddha, together they form really a huge, an immense, epic spiritual biography extending through countless lifetimes. This biography opens with a vow, world ages in the past, and ends with the fulfillment of that vow countless lifetimes later with the Buddha's attainment of complete and perfectly awakened Buddhahood. The traditional introduction to the Pali Jataka, titled the Nidankanta, presents the vow. In that story, the Buddha was a sage named Sumedha, who in a far distant past life meets the Buddha of that previous world age named Dipankara. And he is so inspired by that meeting that he vows to undertake the way of the Bodhisattva, though it take countless lifetimes rather than enter into nirvana at that time. He vows to fully mature into an awakened Buddha so as to be able to help liberate, free all living beings, rather than finding what we might call salvation or liberation for himself. So that decision is then followed by all the stories of that effort. Those are the Jataka tales. And they show the Buddha facing, or the Buddha to be, not the Buddha at that time. He's a deer, he's a dog, he's a sage, he's a thief, he's a king, he's a gambler, he's a parent, he's all kinds of things. He's a parrot, many beings, many kinds of beings. In those lives, he's tested and challenged, and also fails, and also triumphs in his maturing through the challenges of every life experience as he moves along, completing, perfecting his vow, which means perfecting the paramitas, virtues, generosity, inner strength, attention, and meditation, and so on. Anyway, this vast epic concludes with his birth as Siddhartha Gautama, the historical figure that we know who left home at an early age, 29, dedicated himself to practice, having seen the terrifying situation all human beings, all living beings are in, of impermanence. And this set him off to complete a vow he had made lifetimes, countless lifetimes in the past. And the story concludes with his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, then a lifetime of teaching, and an entrance into parinirvana. So this is a very lengthy biography. We may say it's the longest history of any of the world's heroes ever attempted. It's certainly the longest novel with one main character yet conceived. It is a deeply imaginative undertaking showing how one being matures fully in wisdom and compassion. It is also a presentation of how each being, that is, each of us, can, over countless lifetimes, do so as well. For though all beings are Buddha, paradoxically, it takes conscious commitment, perseverance, and ongoing effort for what is already fully intrinsic to each of us to awake and function. Seen in this way, the Jatakas are classical Buddhism's key to understanding living Zen. So our first Jataka, as I said, of the sesshin will be the Banyan Deer. It's Nigrodhamiga Jataka, which is number 12 in the Pali collection of 547 such past life tales of the Buddha. And I'll read from this book, The Banyan Deer, that I did with Wisdom Publications a few years back. And I'll do it basically because I don't think we've taken this perspective. We've usually approached this, whenever I've done this story, from a very traditional perspective. This is a little different, so you'll see. It's the mother deer and the fawn who are saved talking after the event. Mother, said the young deer, is that King Banyan? They're looking at a statue, actually, a pillar with the Banyan Deer on the top. Mother, said the young deer, is that King Banyan? Yes, child, that is the king. His likeness was carved atop this stone pillar by order of a human king. And the story of this pillar is the story of how you were born. Me? My birth? Oh, please, tell me the story. That is why I brought you here. You're old enough now. We stand in the very spot it all took place. It was like this. Back when I still carried you within my body, before you were born, that same human king I mentioned loved to hunt. What did he hunt? Asked the young deer. He hunted living animals, living creatures like us, answered his mother. Like us? But why? He liked the chase, and he liked to eat meat. Meat? Our bodies. Oh, said the young deer with a shudder. Yes, the king loved to hunt. But the shopkeepers, teachers, wheelwrights, potters, tailors, carpenters, and farmers of his kingdom were not happy about it. Not at all. But the king made all his subjects join him. He insisted that they help drive the forest animals towards his huntsmen's bows. Because of this, fields lay idle. Children were not well schooled. The potter's clay was not dug. Tailors didn't cut and sew. Homes stood half-built. And so people decided to take matters into their own hands. To solve their problem, they joined together and built a stockade deep in the forest. Then they drove 2 herds of deer inside. Now, they said, the king won't need us for his hunts. He can hunt whenever he wants, to his heart's content, and we can get back to our lives and work. And one of those herds was our herd? Asked the young deer. And the Banyan Deer was our king? Yes. One of the herds was our king, but the Banyan Deer, one of those herds was our herd, but the Banyan Deer was not our king. Not then. He was the leader of the other herd. Oh, said the fawn with disappointment and confusion, but isn't he our king? Don't be sad, said the doe, you're right. He is our king now. Listen to the story and you'll soon see for yourself what happened, all right? The fawn nodded, and so his mother went on. The stockade gate was locked when the human king arrived. He climbed the steps to the top of the wall, looked down and sighed, how I will miss the glorious chase and the excitement of the hunt. But yes, these people must have their lives. I will only shoot the deer in the stockade. You may all go back to your homes, only thy hunters need remain." Then he added, "Those two deer, king, the leaders of the herds, are both magnificent animals. No one is to shoot them." The people went home. The hunter shot a deer for the king's kitchen. And to the king and his people, all seemed well. But it was not for us deer. Many were wounded by flying arrows. Many more were injured in the mad rush to escape the hunter's arrows. And each day one of us was killed. Every day it was the same. The archers drew their bows and the stockade erupted in panic and chaos, each deer scrambling for safety, but there was no safety. And each day another deer was carried off to the king's kitchen, while many other deer were hurt, just trying to escape, just trying to stay alive. One day the Banyan Deer went to the leader of our herd. "Brother," he said, shaking his noble antlered head, "I've searched everywhere, tried every exit, but there is no escape. So for the sake of our herds, let us hold a lottery. One day a deer from my herd will be selected by lot to stand before the huntsman, and the next day a deer from yours. In this way, each day, only one deer will be shot and no others will be injured." It is a terrible solution, but at least in this way we can relieve our people's suffering. And our king agreed. The next day, when the human king and his bowmen came and stood atop the stockade wall, they found one trembling deer standing there, all alone. The human king said, "Those deer kings are wise. They found a way to help their people." I saw his face when he said it. Remember, I myself was there. And the human king looked troubled. Then just one arrow flew, and that one deer was killed. But no other deer were injured, and for many days that's how it went. Each day one deer died, and the rest of us were safe. Then one day the lot fell to a doe who was soon to give birth. "Was that you, mother?" asked the young deer. "Yes," she answered, looking down tenderly at him. "It was, and the child I carried was you." But it wasn't right. The terms of the lottery were clear. Only one was supposed to die. I went to my king and said, "Great king, the lot has fallen on me, but I'm now with child. Once my fawn is born and able to live on its own, I'll go willingly and take my place before the huntsman. But if I go now, both I and my unborn fawn will die. The lottery claims only one life at a time. Please spare my child." But my king said, "It's impossible. There can be no exceptions. The law is the law. The lottery fell on you, so now you must die." "That was hard-hearted," said the young deer, pawing the ground with his hoof. He'd been spared from the hunt and was never in any danger of losing his life. He should have spoken more kindly. "Yes, that was my thought too," said his mother. But I was not yet ready to give up. Instead, I ran to the Banyan Deer and told him of my troubles. "You are right," said the great being. "You must wait till your fawn is born and strong enough to survive on its own. Go and be at peace. Another shall take your place." Grateful beyond measure, I bounded joyously away, but it was not just any deer who would die in my place. No, it was the Banyan Deer King himself who now walked to where the hunters waited. I had not understood that he meant to offer himself. But after all, how could he ask anyone else to make such a sacrifice? He had freed me. Now he alone would take my place. That was very brave. "He is a great king," said the young deer. "The greatest," agreed the doe. When I realized what he intended, I felt terrible. I hadn't meant for him to die. So I followed at a distance to watch what happened, and here's what I saw. When the hunters looked down, bows at the ready, they were shocked to see the great Banyan Deer himself standing below. "Get the king," they called. When the human king came, the hunters said, "Sire, look." The king looked. "Banyan Deer King," he called in surprise, "why have you come? You know I've spared you from my hunt. Go now and send another in your place. I cannot go. I've come here to take the place of a doe with fawns, said great Banyan. The lottery fell on her, but it's not right that two should die when our lottery only demands one. So I have taken her place. The human king was amazed. What? He exclaimed. You would give your own life to save another? I would, great king. I shall. The human king was visibly shocked. He tugged at his beard and stared down at our noble Banyan Deer for a long, long time. Then at last he said, Great Banyan Deer, this is a noble lesson. A king must care for the least of his subjects. I should learn from you. Such caring has not been my strength. So in payment to you of a teacher's fee, I offer you a special gift. You and your herd can go free. Take your people and go live in peace. From this day forth, you're all spared from my hunt. But the great deer only shook his head. O king of men, I cannot go, he said. What of the other herd? If my herd and I now leave, they'll only suffer all the more. Well, they're not. Day in and day out, your arrows will only fall on them. What's more, the doe with fawn that I came here to save is in that herd. So she and her unborn fawn would soon die once my herd and I left. What would be the point of buying our freedom at such a cost? How can I be free unless the other herd is free too? Seeing all this from my place of safety, I was stunned and filled with hope. My heart leapt with such fierce joy. The human king seemed astounded too. Again he tugged at his beard and stared down speechlessly into the stockade. Then he said, So you would actually risk your safety and that of your herd for this other herd, though they're none of your own? I would, great king, said the Banyan Deer. I shall. This is a great lesson indeed, admitted the human king. Very great. He sighed deeply, then, So shall it be. Go now and live in peace, for I shall free the other herd as well. But the Banyan Deer did not leave. He again shook his head and said, Too long have I lived with danger to let it fall so heavily on others now. All the other four-footed animals of the forest will suffer terribly if I leave. They'll be hunted without limit or mercy. How can I abandon them and be at peace myself, knowing that my freedom was bought at such a price? I know the terrors of the hunt. I too have lived in the midst of that fear. Free them as well, great king. If you really mean for me to be happy and at peace, it is the only way. The king hung his head and pondered. Again he sighed. It seemed you're determined to make farmers of us all. But I see your point. The wisdom of your words is clear. If you go, others will suffer all the more. So what can I do? All the other animals shall be freed for my hunt as well. There, I'm finished. It's done. You've been my teacher, and now I feel I've learned enough. The price of your wisdom is steep, but what you say is true. So go and live in peace, great Banyan king. You have freed the other herds and all the forest beasts. It was very quiet. I could hardly believe my ears. We were all free. I remember hearing a bird sing from somewhere deep in the forest. It was a beautiful song, but the Banyan Deer did not move. He did not leave. Instead, he looked up at the trees and at the sky and said, Alas, sire, I cannot go. Your Majesty, look up. See the brightly feathered flyers that sing so sweetly and build their nests throughout your land. The birds, sire, the birds, your slings, nets, arrows, will now await them at every turn. Such a rain of death will fall upon them as could hardly be imagined. How can I leave and be at peace myself? Knowing this, great king, have mercy, I beg you. Free them too. I saw the king bite his lip. I saw him wipe his eyes. At last he said, Great being, you are unrelenting, but you are right. how can there be real peace unless it extends to all? How can we be happy when any suffer? So now I release the birds too from my hunt. From this day forth they shall fly freely throughout my land. Go now, great one, and at last be at peace. Your Majesty, said the Banyan Deer, in whom both wisdom and generosity overflow, how can I go? Your nets, hooks, and spears will soon be poised in terrible numbers above the silvery swimmers, the fish, great king, the fish. Are they not beautiful? Do they not swirl and leap and swim, bringing life and beauty to every river, lake, and stream of your land? If I do not speak for these silent ones now, who ever will? How can I abandon them to such a fate? Let them live too, great king. Are vegetables tasty when eaten alone, asked the human king? Are beans, grains, and fruit delicious when served without fish, fowl, or meat? For such, now it seems, must be my only food. You drive a hard bargain, great being, but yes, again, I see your wisdom. For any of us to have real peace, all beings, even the fish, must be free. So now, hear this, all my courtiers in attendance, announced the king, from this day on, all living beings throughout the realm are to be held as my own dear subjects. None shall be hunted, none trapped or killed. All shall fall under my protection. This is my true wish and lasting decree. Then turning to the Banyan Deer, he said, there, great one, are you now at peace? The Banyan Deer looked around and saw all us deer grazing peacefully in the stockade. He looked up and saw birds singing and soaring overhead. Through spaces between the logs of the stockade, he glimpsed the many forest animals. A tear fell from the deer king's eye, a single tear, yet in it was reflected the entire living world. Yes, great king, he said, now at last I am at peace. And he leapt like a fawn, leapt for joy, sheer joy. He'd saved them all. Open the gates, called the human king, and the gates swung open. Then the great Banyan Deer led both herds out of the stockade and back into the green forest. When the herds separated and went their ways, I didn't hesitate. I went with the herd of the Banyan Deer. Later, the human king had this pillar of stone set on the very spot where our Banyan Deer king had made his great leap. And on it he had carved this statue and these words, praise to the Banyan Deer, teacher of kings. And so, said the doe, I was the deer that great Banyan saved, and you, my dear, were the unborn fawn whose life he spared. I was, wasn't I? Said the young deer slowly, taking it all in. And it all began because I was about to be born. What a lucky event that was, and just in the nick of time, too. But mother, where did I come from? Asked the young deer. Why, you came from one of the heavens, no doubt, said his mother, because if not for you, none of the deer, birds, fish, and animals would have been saved, not one. If not, that is for you and our great Banyan Deer King. Imagine that, said the young deer. Yes, said the doe quietly. Imagine. So the Banyan Deer is quite a compelling story. Let's take a look at it from the perspective of our time. First, a quote from William Blake, a wise old man of the West. The wild deer wandering here and there keeps the human soul from care. That's from his Proverbs of Hell and the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. We like to imagine that compassion is as natural for a bodhisattva as reaching back for a pillow in the night. At a certain point, no doubt it is, but the consequences of having a heart of compassion can be dire. In this Jataka, the bodhisattva, the Buddha-to-be, faces the first noble truth of impermanence. And rather than taking refuge from it in self-concern, he stands his ground and steps forward from there. And he does this as an animal, a so-called lesser being. The Bodhisattva as a deer works through his attachment to body and mind so quickly we might miss it, that even for such an advanced being, this had to have been a milestone, something he himself might have known he was capable of doing until he did it. And then he went on and did it again and again and again. By the way, in the Jatakas, spiritual maturity, not evolutionary form, has precedence. So an animal can be more spiritually evolved than a human being. The liberating work of Zazen can seem like torment to our deeply ingrained unconscious habits of egotism. William Blake spoke of delighting in the torments of genius, for it is liberating. A few months ago, I sat at the bedside of a close friend who was dying. He was working hard, and while he was still able to speak, he kept repeating a self-created mantra over and over. Lord, have mercy on us all. Lord, have mercy on us all. Lord, have mercy on us all. He was doing the work of dying, that is the work of being born. Letting go of self-centeredness, of all opposition to what is, fully, selflessly accepting everything just as it is, was the meaning of his mantra. It is the meaning, if we can use such a word, of our Zazen. The realization of just this, the sword that kills is the sword that gives life, as Manjushri is always reminding us. We live in difficult, dangerously isolating times, yet through our practice of Zen, our habitual belief in a solid, lasting, independent self, irrevocably and terribly separate from flowers, birds, stars, trees, mountains, clouds, bugs, rivers, people, even people we love, can be put to rest. Seen through our own unexamined concepts of isolated selfhood is the liberating work of practice realization. The dying to delusion, that is the actualization of Bodhisattva vows, our 4 vows, or great vows for all. Dogen writes in the Genjo Koan section of Shobogenzo, I, of the treasury of the true Dharma, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things of the universe. To be enlightened by all things of the universe is to cast off the body and mind of the self, as well as that or those of others. Even the traces of enlightenment are extinguished, and a life of traceless enlightenment goes on forever and ever. That great iconoclast of the 15th century, Zen Master Ikkyu, said, when I tried to remember, I always forgot. But once I forgot, I never forget. Once myself is completely forgotten, everything I was trying to remember is right there. To forget the self is to attend to this breath, this count, this koan. The Banyan Deer Bodhisattva, the Buddha in a past life, clearly does this, no longer clinging to the unconscious habit of a self-centered self. There is no other. Non-dual insight segues seamlessly into compassionate action. Freeing oneself frees others. Even a slight degree of insight into what Zen tradition terms emptiness, that is empty of all habitual self-centeredness, rather than isolating us, opens a door to more complete and vital living. We might notice things long overlooked: the color of the rug, the taste of the tea, the feel of the wind, the blue of the immense sky, or we might simply extend ourselves without holding back and ask someone how they're doing. Being less caught up in me, myself, and I means being more fully here than ever, which makes sense. When the habitual reference point called me is less heavily here, the world of countless things can step in and realize itself. The world is vast and wide. Yet many people today still sadly think of Buddhism as some kind of passive, calm, maddeningly peaceful, always smiling, navel-gazing tradition. Or if they think of Zen Buddhism, they think of being in the zone beyond irritation and pain, at ease, unencumbered, sinking three-point baskets, running a marathon, painting a masterpiece without effort, sweat, or thought. True enough, there are such moments. But what of actual practice? What of years of exertion, aching knees, anxiety before doksan, wrong paths taken for seemingly the best of reasons? What of failures and disappointments? What of difficult days surviving on a single sesame seed and lonely nights of what can feel like pointless zazen? They're in our practice. And as the Jataka tales and legends of the Buddha's life show, they were in his life and practice too. Looking at the Jatakas, we don't see escapism or quietism. Rather, what we see is an evolving, maturing practice opening into selfless acts of compassion and courage. Yet even for the Buddha, there were times when it must have been hard. Times when he stood alone at a crossroads, facing tough decisions. The Tigress Jataka, in which he gives himself to a starving tigress to save her from devouring her own cubs, is one such story that comes to mind. And there's also the Blue Bear Jataka, in which he forgives the hunter whose life he'd saved and who then betrayed him. And of course, there's this Jataka of the Banyan Deer. Though he's been presented with personal safety, even personal freedom, the Bodhisattva excuse me, offers his own life instead to save a pregnant doe and her unborn fawn. And then he moves forward step by courageous step, facing down each temptation to split and run, until he saved all the trapped deer, all the forest animals, all the birds, and even all the fish, before finally accepting freedom for himself. It becomes a mind-blowing tale embodying the deepest bodhisattva vow to free others before liberating oneself. But in actuality, the two go hand in hand. We free others by freeing ourselves. By freeing ourselves of habitual self-centeredness, we release others from the self-centered judgments and demands we unconsciously and habitually put on them. In time, we no longer need to keep that fixed world so solidly and defensively in place. We free ourselves by putting others' needs before our own, maybe more accurately, by treating others' needs with the same concern we offer our own. The core of Zen, indeed of all Mahayana, that is great way Buddhism, is the vow to free all being. It is the first of our 4 vows or great vows for all. While we may begin practicing Zen to get free of personal suffering, in time, like the Banyan Deer, we come to see that we can't be free unless others are also free as well. And the converse is also true. Others can't be free unless we are. As Vimalakirti said, I am sick because all beings are sick, with the sicknesses of greed, anger, and ignorance of their own actual nature. Once they're free of sickness, then I will be well too. Once we catch a glimpse of the truth that we are not isolated, not separated from all life, something shifts. We can't help but start taking greater responsibility, doing small things to help not just ourselves, but others. So begins the path of the Bodhisattva, the maturing wisdom being, or growing up being, the one wise enough to choose to grow beyond the fundamental mistaken habit of thinking a self-centered identity is all we are. A Bodhisattva is a growing up being. A Buddha, a fully grown-up one. Zen teaches that freeing beings means releasing beings from the delusion of unenlightenment that arises from attachment to the concept of an habitually self-centered, permanent self vaguely in here, and countless others, the many beings, the 10,000 things, somewhere out there. Fundamentally, beings are freed, saved from the sufferings of self-centered delusion by practice realization. But freeing or saving also means doing what we can to free others, human and non-human alike, from the destructive effects of dualistic thinking. Social and political systems built on superiority and inferiority, environmental destruction, denigration of women, starvation in the midst of plenty, melting ice caps, vanishing species, bombs, guns, explosives in fields where children play, walls topped with barbed wire and broken glass, fear, hunger, injustice, racism, chauvinism, the exhaustion of common resources. In short, the whole catastrophe springing from our ancient addiction to egotism, the mistaken unconscious belief in a fixed, separate, permanent, savable, enlightenable self or soul. But how do we release others when we're so often hardly able to free ourselves? Isn't this the height of egotism? Should we knock on doors and hand out pamphlets? Should we whisper, "You are Buddha," in people's ears? Zen offers a way that is direct, simple, and clear, and rigorous. We cause less harm, indeed, even become capable of helping ourselves and others through ongoing, persistent practice, through attention to this breath, this count, this koan. In short, by committing to the work of Zazen, we learn to die to habits of self-centeredness, see through what is false, and to use a more modern metaphor, change channels from me, myself, and I to the way of the Bodhisattva, the growing up being. This is the essence of our second Bodhisattva vow. If the first is to free all beings, the second shows us how to do it. Endless blind passions I vow to uproot. Or as we say it at Endless Path, Zendo, greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. This vow is about the nitty-gritty work of actual, not theoretical, liberation. Letting go of attachment to habitual unconscious self-centeredness, we impose fewer judgments and projective burdens on others. Through attention to the practice, we free others, which includes animals, insects, plants, from what our ignorance projects onto them, even as we free ourselves. We release those around us from categories, from the insistence that you be this, the tree be that thing over there, and that me, myself, and glorious I be the center of it all. Being less caught up on ourselves, less bound by ourselves, we have more energy, space, and time to be more present, and so of greater use to all. Once again, to repeat, being less here, we are more here than ever. The chirping of birds, the soughing of wind, the clanking of heat pipes, the vroom of traffic can be symphonies. The light on winter's snow or on autumn's leaves can be masterwork. A chat with a friend is transformative as a novel. Well, this is what practice helps us get to. Paradoxically, it starts by revealing the sobering truth of how self-involved we presently are. Some people can become disheartened by this. They may even begin to think that their Zen practice is not working, or that it's counterproductive, or that they're doing something wrong. Not so. Persisting, we begin to see that such a humbling reality check is important. Seeing what our minds are actually doing moment by moment, we begin to see how we ourselves build the bricks of our prison, how we ourselves participate in walling ourselves in. Seeing how we create our own suffering is the beginning of stopping that suffering, thereby freeing ourselves and others from the world it creates. Zen teachers aren't gurus, they are guides. We ourselves must do the work. Traditionally, a Buddhist teacher is termed a Kalyana Mitra, a Sanskrit word meaning spiritual friend. A teacher is someone who's gone further down the path than we have, someone we can trust to correct us before we step off the trail and get lost, before we tumble down unseen precipices. A Zen teacher especially is like a skilled thief, someone who can rob us blind of all we cling to. The Banyan Deer appears in two versions in the Pali Jataka of 547 such tales, and while the differences are minor, the core of each is that the deer Bodhisattva, the Buddha in a past life, offers his own life to save a doe, an unborn fawn, and then goes on to save all the other animals. In both versions, compassion wins out over the habitual impulse to save oneself at the expense of others. In each tale, we see the central vow to save all beings brought to life. Mahayana Buddhism, Great Way Buddhism, Maha is great, Yana is way, which includes Zen, is great because it does not exclude anyone or anything, but includes all beings, each and every one. And because it recognizes that in reality, all beings are already on the great way, whether they even yet know it or not. Mahayana Buddhism, Great Way Buddhism, is big or great because it realizes that the vow to fully awaken for the benefit of all is at the core of life. It's not an add-on. Why is it the core of life? Because it is the nature of mind, not intellect, but mind, to know itself. And knowing itself, to act for the welfare or to the welfare of itself, which really means the welfare of all. In our tale, because of the Bodhisattva deer's selfless action, not just a doe and its fawn, but everyone is freed, even the king and his huntsmen stop creating their own bad karma caused by their commitment to killing. Because of the Banyan Deer's decision to live his vow, a human being with power in the social order can grasp the fundamental truth. No one can be free, not really, unless all are. Amazingly, in this Jataka, this vital truth is open to a human king, not through the efforts of some superhuman savior, not through the efforts of some great human sage, but through the courageous compassion of what we might dismissively call a mere animal. Today, the natural world and countless mere animals, countless non-human species are in grave danger. Beset daily by destructive stresses, the central cause of which is our own human delusion, our sadly self-destructive, illusory sense of isolation and separation. The literal harm now caused by our ignorance of our connection to all life, to the planet itself, is becoming so obvious that this tale of the Banyan Deer can speak more clearly to us now than it has maybe the past several thousand years. The teaching of the Banyan Deer Bodhisattva that no one can be free and at peace unless all are makes absolute sense. Our delusion of isolation is killing our world. At the same time, every threatened species that vanishes reduces us. We know this today in our bones. It has to stop. We're all in danger. To live the Banyan Deer's courageous, compassionate truth is our daily challenge. It starts anew each day, each round of Zazen with the count, the breath, the koan. We take it up again and again. This is where and how the gateless gate opens. This is where we take our committed stand and do not back down. An implication of a fascinating section of the Shobogenzo, Eye of the Treasury of the True Dharma, titled Gabyo, which is painting of a rice cake, is that dreams, stories, art, books, movies, wooden, metal, clay, and painted Buddhas, thoughts, and vows are food. Only painted cakes satisfy hunger, says Master Dogen, turning the old adage, painted cakes can't satisfy hunger, on its head. And then he playfully adds, without painted hunger, we never become true people. For Dogen, Jataka tales are Buddha painting a picture of Buddha with the brush and ink of, to quote him, countless kalpas of assiduous practice. That's how you paint a picture of a Buddha, with countless kalpas of your own, our own, assiduous practice. That is, with the determination to continue practicing whatever comes. This sustained exertion dramatized by the Jatakas is the real food offered by the Banyan Deer, the teaching of interconnection, backed by the entire force of the Bodhisattva's whole being, is a meal the human king found more nourishing than any plate of venison. Responsibilities begin where the imagination has been touched. Yeats wrote, in dreams begin responsibilities. After encountering the Banyan Deer, we too, like the king, will hopefully never be the same. Stories, flimsy as they are, just squiggles on a piece of paper when written, just sounds on the air when spoken, can and often do save us by hearing and telling stories, passing them on. We in turn save them. It is mutual. Indigenous people say that stories are themselves living beings. A question remains. The Banyan Deer saves all the beings in that one kingdom, but can he save all beings everywhere? Can such a vow be accomplished? Can the great vow made by all bodhisattvas, the vow to save all beings, have literal meaning, literal fulfillment? Or must it remain the expression of an impossible desire or hope, a pointer towards something we can never accomplish? Perhaps. Yet lofty goals can help us see how far we are from where we want to be. Walking in the woods at night, a far-off light seen shining through the trees can show us where we mean to go. In his 80th year of life, the English sculptor Henry Moore was asked, now that you're 80, you must know the secret of life. What is it? Moore paused. The secret of life, he mused, is to have a task, something you do your entire life, something you bring everything to, every minute of the day for your whole life. And the most important thing is, it must be something you cannot possibly do. It must be something you cannot possibly do. Once 2 herds of deer were trapped and marked for death. One deer said no to that, risking his safety and that of his herd. He didn't do it to make a point. He did it because he saw there was no way he could be free and at peace unless all beings were also free. Animal though he was, he'd realized what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. He had the perception, not owned by any one tradition, perhaps not even by any one species, of how things really are. And he did not turn from it. That's what's so overwhelming about the story. The Banyan Deer is not simply a tale of heroic compassion. It is a tale of non-dual prajna wisdom. And because it is, the path of practice realization includes not only sesshin, right livelihood, personal integrity, and precepts, but social and environmental and planetary justice for all as well. So that all includes even plants and animals, forests and rivers. This life, just as it is now, his life on the great way of the Bodhisattva. And because this is truly so, the path of the Banyan Deer is here right now with this breath, this count, this koan. This is where we take our stand. This is where our real aim, which is to liberate all beings, comes alive.